I'm trying to do what I can from my position as a white female, middle class, never had any financial difficulties. Very thankful for how blessed that I am. But I know that a lot of that is because of my white privilege.
Welcome to Jazz Therapy, where we explore the intersectionality of jazz, the psyche and psychoanalytic thought, spirituality, and consciousness. We have in-depth conversations with people from various walks of life, all of whom view their work as a service to humanity. Then we listen to jazz and discuss our thoughts, feelings, and reflections which arise from hearing this incredible art form. I'm your host, Jessie Shapiro. This show is for entertainment and educational purposes only. If you or someone you know is feeling suicidal or in an emotional crisis, you can call or text the SAMHSA Crisis Line, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association, through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Simply call or dial 988 24/7, 365 days a year. My guest today is Frances Dack. Frances learned a love of the arts from her father as a child. In high school, she enjoyed sewing in the home economics room so much, most of her free periods were spent there. In college, she majored in special education and minored in art. She has spent much of her life volunteering, substitute teaching, quilting, and being active in her local United Church of Christ, UCC. From her parents and from being a member of the UCC, she has developed a strong call to do work in social justice. In her adult life, she learned how to quilt, but not one to follow directions or be very good at sewing a straight line. She quickly evolved into an art quilter. Frances was very happy to find the Social Justice Sewing Academy, which combines her need to make a difference in the world and her love of quilting. Well, welcome, Frances. Thank you so much for being with me here today. Today's theme, I thought, would be spirituality, social justice, and jazz, of course. And so I wanted to read a couple quotes about quilting before we go listen to the jazz. At the second half of the program, I'll read some quotes on social justice. I love quotes, so I just thought I would set the tone, and then we'll go from there. What I make with my hands, I give of my heart. That's the first one. Love is the thread that binds us. And quilters affect eternity. They can never tell where their influence stops. And then one more. Quilts connect the past with the present and the future.
Those are all really good quilts.
All right.
I mean quotes, excuse me. You know, every stitch, I've made quilts for certain people, like my children when they got married, for example, that kind of thing, which is common of quilters to do. And every stitch is pouring my love for them into the quilt. I try to make sure that they know that. And the one about the past and a quilter not knowing what the influence will be, quilters in the past have influenced the quilters of today. I think people don't realize this. Even quilters in the past have done social comment. Definitely. That's kind of part of quilting that it's a little bit hidden, but it's really there if you look for it. And you'll see things that have influenced what's going on in their day or what's going on in our days.
I love that you brought that up. And I did learn that about the history of quilt making in some of my research for today, what you just alluded to in terms of quilting having been part of social change and social commentary. And one thing I learned was that abolitionists who were working to end slavery also did many craft and quilt work around bringing attention to this cause, which was really interesting to hear. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's the legend, at least, that quilts on the Underground Railroad were a symbol to escaping slaves as to where to go, or that this is a safe place. There's debate about whether or not that was really used, but they did have messaging, and that could have been it.
I read that too, and that also there's not certainty as if this really happened or not, that it was maybe
Yeah.
legend. It was mentioned, I believe, in a novel. I'm not sure if it's documented or not. One thing I learned about too, just in the history of quilt making, and I'd love to hear you elaborate more on this, is that quilting, of course, started over in Europe and then made its way over to the United States. At first, only wealthy people that were doing quilting, and this is a quote from Wikipedia that I got, only the wealthy had the leisure time for quilt making, so such quilting was done by only a few. Often enslaved women would come together and make quilts because they needed to make bed coverings for themselves. Quilting for them was a means of necessity to provide bedclothes and covering for their families, a way for women to come together in a communal way to talk about their struggles, to foster resilience among one another, and really have the fabric of social connection. So it was really interesting to hear about the two parallels. One, like the wealthy white people over here doing quilts, and then quilting having a meaning of survival, and then this communal element as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, you've read some history. My impression is that in America, quilting became more utilitarian, using old things. Like one of the things that I like to do is reuse or repurpose things in my art. I made a piece out of rusty nails. It's an art piece, but it has rusty nails in it and rusted fabric. Okay, so it is a quilt, but it's a reusing, and I have a collection of old straws and things that what people would call trash. But it's a reusing. That's in our blood, I think, as quilters, is to reuse things. And another thing that you mentioned that's in our blood as quilters, as American quilters anyway, is the whole social aspect of it. And the quilting bee that people think of, where the pioneer women gather around a quilt frame under a shady tree or something, and they're doing the hand quilting. Um, that has evolved into the current day where we may be working on a project together or we may be working on our individual projects. But that's what the bee has kind of evolved into, those kind of sew days.
I could imagine it's so fulfilling to accomplish a quilt, and to be able to do it in a group setting is so nourishing, since you're there and others are celebrating you and you're able to talk and bond and connect. That sounds really lovely. Well, Frances, I read that you really learned to love art from your father, and I wondered if you could just tell us about that and how you felt the call to start quilting.
My dad was a kind of a dabbler in lots of different art. We have a couple of paintings that have survived, some sculpting and three-dimensional things. And I remember I have a ring that he made out of a spoon handle. He did a lot of different stuff. And so he helped me do stuff. But mostly what I did with him is go to museums. When I was in high school, we lived near Philadelphia, and we would go to Philadelphia a lot, and we would go to the Rodin Museum, and I just loved the Rodin Museum. So I just learned an appreciation for art from him. Didn't do much in art in high school, although I did do some sewing. I had one project in home ec where I was doing a lot of hand embroidery on the sleeve. Every free period, I went to the home ec room and would do my stitching. But at the end of the year, it was the home ec award. And so anybody that went to home ec knew me because I was always there. So I got the home ec award. And then I really dabbled a little bit in fibers, hand embroidery, and a little bit of weaving, not much really, in college. And then when I first got married in like 77, I tried to take a course in quilting, and that somehow or another that didn't pan out. But once my youngest child was around 6, I started quilting. And the quilting teacher that I had, that was when I lived in Iowa, was interested in quilts as art as well as quilts as utility. That kind of started me going. Several years later, we moved to Rochester, New York, and I got involved in RAFA, which is Rush. Rochester area fiber artists. And I've, never looked back. I really prefer to do art quilts. Our church has a group and we make things so that we can give them to some of the elderly or people that have had a really hard time during the year at Christmas time in a Christmas package. So that's kind of my quilting journey.
If you'd like to know more, you can visit my website at www.jazztherapy.com. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the states of California and New York. You can also check out my profile page on Psychology Today, which I'll leave linked below. Well, thank you for sharing just about your journey. I noticed you said something in there. You prefer now making art quilts, and that would be art quilts as compared with, I don't really know much about the genre of quilting. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the different types of quilts that a layperson could
Oh, okay.
understand.
I think most people think of squares and triangles put together in a pattern. I think that's a traditional quilt. It's a thing that you use. You put it over your body to keep warm. Art quilts are things that you put on the wall as a piece of art, just like any other painting or photograph.
That makes a lot of sense. So, and these are the type of quilts that would like be displayed in museums or
Yes, yes,
also.
and they could be any sort of art genre. They could be abstract, they could be realism, they could be impressionistic, surreal. I mean, they could be anything. It's not just circles and squares and triangles anymore, or it could be because that could be the abstraction, or it could be, a picture of a woman or a squirrel.
So the field of quilting is very rich and kind of multifaceted.
Yes, it is. And art quilters have struggled over the years to be recognized in the art community as more than just crafters, to be fine artists. I think we're like there in a lot of people recognize this form as authentic as or as viable as an art form or an art medium, just like oil or acrylic sculpture can be a real accepted medium for fine art.
I was going to say it's really interesting that there has been this sort of snobbery around are quilts art or
Yeah.
not. And it's really wonderful that they're evolving and coming more into the fold. And just like the quote that we heard about quilts connecting the past and the present, I think it is so cool that art and quilting are kind of coming together because I sense younger generations are maybe going to be more open to the quilting and how cool and expressive and modern it could be versus kind of a more
Hmm.
traditional quilts are only for bed covering that they really can reach so many more
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, Francis. And before we get into quilting, one part of the show that I really love is I love to talk to people about what spirituality is and then how that connects to their main passion. So, what does spirituality mean to you, and what does that look like in your life?
Wow. Okay. That's so hard to define. I've gone to church all my life. The odd thing about me is that my parents had me baptized at 3, but they were not Christians and have always said that they were atheists. And my mother would always say, "Do you want to go to church on Sunday morning?" And I would say yes, and she would take me to church. So I'm one of those kind of kids. So I've always had attraction to church, and as a youth I was in an Episcopal church, kind of a high Episcopal church, and I really liked the rituals and the symbolism. And I stayed an Episcopalian until I got married. My husband was in seminary at the time to become a United Church of Christ pastor. I'm fully into the United Church of Christ now. It doesn't have all that ritualism and all that, but it's a little bit more individual, I guess. Each person kind of chooses their own beliefs, not necessarily one creed, for example. The United Church of Christ has a thing called the Statement of Faith, And one of the things my husband always liked to do, and he just did it recently at our church, anyhow, where you stand up during a part of that that really identify with a part of the statement of faith. So the United Church of Christ is like that. Spirituality maybe is kind of like that too. There's so many different ways that you can enhance your spirituality or your connection. It's like a connection with God somehow, Is it community prayer at a service? Is it individual prayer? Is it meditation? Is it walking the labyrinth? All of these different ways help a person develop their spirituality and their connection with the divine.
Well, I'm sensing that maybe some of those ways that you just enumerated are ways that you connect with the divine. And I wonder if you could say more about that, how you connect with God and if that language resonates with you and what your practices look like.
I've always struggled with keeping a regular practice. I just got to admit. And I'm learning as of late that that's okay. Don't degrade myself for that. I've been experimenting with different types of spiritual contemplative practices lately. I do like ones that involve movement and repetition. Sort of like a mantra, only I do it in English, so that I can understand what I'm saying. Um, I might say, may I be content in my creativity. And I really like doing that as I'm walking. That's what seems to work best for me.
I love that. That's so beautiful that you came up with your own mantra, especially related to creativity since you are a creative and an artist. So that's a little tip and trick I'm going to come back to and remember. I also have a mantra. I use often the mantra of Kuan Yin, which is Om Mani Padme Hum. She was like the female Buddha. And that helps me. And I love the idea of just even doing that on a walk and making that part of the practice.
Something I thought of recently is that, you know, growing up as an Episcopalian, where there's a lot of, I did genuflecting, crossing. I did standing up and sitting down, kneeling on the kneeling pads. You know, all of that movement that I grew up with during a worship service. Protestant denominations don't really do that very much, but all of that is helps, I think. When you change your position, it changes your mind too, I think.
That's a really beautiful point too. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, that just your formative experience of being in a setting where, you were feeling a connection with the divine, it did involve bodily movement, and it now that would totally make sense that it's something that you still connect with. And I also love the idea that it continues to instill in us that our spirituality and being as loving as we can is something that we're aiming to do like all hours of the day, not just when we're in any one position. I really resonated with what you said about that it's hard to stick to a regular daily practice. And you said, and I'm learning that that's okay. And that was so wonderful to hear too, because yes, it's like we don't need to put any more critical, talk or whatever it is on top of ourselves if we're not sort of just for any reason, but especially when it comes to some kind of a spiritual practice, which is supposed to be nourishing. What it is you do personally when you feel activated or triggered or have big feelings come up. I wanted to read you the Tibetan word for this, which is called Shenpa, and read you a little definition. And this is from Pema Chodron, who is a renowned Buddhist nun and teacher, and she, I believe, is at a monastery in Nova Scotia. So the Tibetan word for this is Shenpa when we get hooked or triggered. It is usually translated attachment, but a more descriptive translation might be, quote, hooked, end quote. When Shenpa hooks us, we're likely to get stuck. We could call Shenpa, quote, that sticky feeling, end quote. It's an everyday experience. Even a spot on your new sweater can take you there. At the subtlest level, we feel a tightening, a tensing, a sense of closing down. Then we feel a sense of withdrawing, not wanting to be where we are. That's the hook quality. That tight feeling has the power to hook us into self-denigration, blame, anger, jealousy, and other emotions which lead to words and actions that end up poisoning us. So what do you do, Frances, when you get Shen Pod? What do you do internally, spiritually to work with yourself in those moments?
Get stuck. um, I
I do too.
personally, I think I probably get stuck for a while, and it helps me to talk to people about it. I can respond to that better in art than I can personally. I had a 12 by 12 quilt, 12 inches by 12 inches, and it was beautiful, and I was getting ready to quilt it. When you're making a quilt, you make a top, you make the batting, which is the soft part in the middle, and then it has a backing. So I had it layered up, and then you quilt it. Then you put the stitches through it, either by hand or by machine. And I was trying to decide, and I do free motion quilting so that my quilting line can go anywhere. I do it on my machine. That's called free motion quilting. So I took a piece of plastic and a marker, wrote on the plastic on top of it. Well, I got a tiny dot that actually went on the quilt, and I was like, oh, and I said a few bad words. And after fuming about that for a little while, I was like, okay, this is a creative opportunity. And this is something I tell myself, and I tell students when I talk to them. I tell other people, you know, when you make a mistake, it's a creative opportunity. And if I could apply that to my life problems, that would be really good. So I'm glad this is a good idea. I should try and apply that to my life problems. That's whatever that word was. Shenpa.
Well, I love just your candor and that you can say that you do get hooked and that you just sometimes have to stay there for a few minutes. I totally can understand that. It's kind of that feeling of when we are really hooked and somebody well meaning might say, oh, take a couple deep breaths. And it's that feeling that's like, I'm so mad. I don't want to take a deep breath right now. Right. It's like we have to prolong the
Yeah,
attachment to our
yeah,
suffering. And I totally do this too. So I love that like that's part of the process too, is just seeing that you're hooked and kind of letting it be there and not prematurely trying to kind of like make it better
yeah,
or move on. And then that is super cool about the idea that every mistake is a creative opportunity. And that I've read a lot of spiritual teachers and just people write about how every moment really, especially the challenging interactions, is the time to practice whatever your spiritual practice is or really be with fully what is present.
hmm
And the way that you use the little dot and that became part of all this scattered apples around your quilt, that's a beautiful example of that. Well, I thought now we might look at the intersectionality of spirituality, service, and quilting, since you're an
hmm
artist, and how that is for you in your life.
It's always something I wanted to, or for many years, focusing more on my art quilts is something I've wanted to do, and I was able to do that once I retired. I can. This is what I do amongst a lot of other things. You probably can tell I'm involved in the church. So over my life, I have gotten more involved and to a more heightened degree of interest in actually doing something about the social justice issues that I see in the world, rather than just fretting about them or sending money. Do something else that's more personal. Um, and so some of those things I'm doing through groups at church. Um, and then I have this creative side that we've been talking about. And it's kind of like a calling, right? To create stuff. Yesterday I didn't get into the sewing room to put a stitch in anything, to touch fabric or do anything until 7 p.m. Well, I was really kind of, tight, just like, eh, this is a terrible day kind of feeling, But, and all I did was put a few stitches in on I'm making a waterproof apron. It's nothing creative really to it at this point, you know. It's just the last few stitches that I need to put in on the machine. And I did some of that, not even all of it, you know. But it just kind of released that pressure for me, which could be a spiritual thing. I that, my soul needed that I need to touch the fabric, some um every day. And that gets I've noticed that that's more, as a retired person. I've been retired since 2019, to the end of the 2019 school year. Um so that's like 4 years, 5 years. I noticed that more and more about myself, that if I don't get in here into my sewing studio and do something, even if it's just putting away stuff, because that needs to happen a lot. Uh, um, you know, I feel like I've gotten some of that creativity out of me that needs to flow out of me every day. Um, the other thing is that, as far as the social justice is concerned, um, I found the Social Justice Sewing Academy. I can't remember exactly when. I knew about them before I went to a lecture that about it. I can't remember exactly how I found out about them, but I was able to plug into some of their programs, and I for me, it helps me be creative and relate to social justice issues at the same time. Um, so, would you like me to start talking about the Social Justice Sewing Academy at this point?
Well, I definitely want to get into that. And you said a couple things I wanted to just
Okay.
follow up on because everything you said was super interesting. And first, I just wanted to highlight that you said, especially on days when you know you might not be in the best mood, that you can totally notice a connection between going and doing something creative and then how much better you
Hmm.
feel. It's like your soul is calling for this release, like this spiritual energy to
Hmm.
move. So I'm definitely going to hold on to that. I guess it kind of reminds me of like, if one's not in a good mood, even just going outside and being by a tree or taking a walk or exercising can sort of have a similar effect. And I think that's kind of what you are saying that you recognize for you.
Yeah. And I would say that getting outside is important also, probably for everybody. I don't speak for everybody, but I think probably for everybody, getting outside is important.
Sure. Yeah, there's so much research that shows that being outdoors can help our blood pressure and our mood. And I always tell clients that I do that myself too, just even getting outside on a busy day really helps. I wanted to ask just in terms of how you ethnically identify and then how that influences your commitment and your role in working towards social justice through your quilting.
Mm. Well, I'm ethnically white, um, European. I have white privilege. I realize that I have white privilege. My life has been pretty easy compared to many people on this earth. Okay, this thought is coming to mind. It's slightly different, but all of our children are adopted. We have 3 children. All of them are adopted. One was born in the United States. He's white, European descent. One was born in Korea. He's Korean. And one was born in India. She's Indian. And as we were adopting these children, it came to me that any child in the world could be my child. And that's true of you, Jesse, and anybody else. Any child in the world could be your child, and could be my child. And that kind of really opened me up to accepting a lot of variety of peoples. Not that I didn't before. I mean, I was raised to accept all peoples, all colors of people, and all that kind of stuff. But that was just sort of a big aha in my life. Um, okay, you're gonna have to get me back on track. Sorry.
Oh, no, that was so beautiful what you were just saying about recognizing that any child could be your child. I really resonated with that, especially when I see photos of wars going on around the world and mothers holding their children in body bags. And I often think, like, that could just easily be me, only I'm here where I am.
Right.
So that's really profound. We were just talking about how your own ethnic identity then influences and has come to influence your social justice work. And then you were
Okay.
vulnerably sharing with us about adopting your three children, and that two of them are people of color, and that really shifted your paradigm
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your.
Yeah. And my upbringing, like I said, was to accept all peoples. And my mother really modeled that very well. Um, I'm sorry, I can't think of anything else to say about this.
That's all right. There might be more that comes later as sort of we're talking. That happens. That's totally fine too. I'm really trying to be thoughtful on this show, where I want to talk about issues of race and privilege and class and culture when they come up. And so finding a way to do that that's thoughtful and intentional,
Okay.
and
Yeah. Okay. So I have
we're
another issue.
just making space for stuff to
Yeah.
emerge.
Okay. So
That's
I have
all.
other formative experiences that have happened in my life around race. When I was a child, I had a dance teacher, a ballet dance teacher. I took ballet for 9 years. So when I was in early elementary or something, my grandmother came to visit us, and it happened to be at a time when I think the recital was happening. And she made a comment to me when we got back home. Your dance teacher is black. And I said, she has pink hands. I hadn't really thought about her being black, and that was different. That was different. So all of a sudden, I realized that is experienced as different. I was very young at that time. I might have been only 5 or 6 even. Um, and then when I was in college, I had another experience around race. I was in college in the late 70s. Excuse me, the early 70s. um, um, and I was dating a black man in Nashville, Tennessee. And we went from the college to downtown Nashville to pick up my roommate from the bus station. And we were waiting in the parking lot, and we're sitting in his car, bucket seats, so we weren't close to each other or anything. And a white man pulled up next to us and started on my side in his car and started looking at us. And the man that I was with said, "Don't look, and we have to leave now." He was born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, so he knew about racism. So we left, and that man followed us, followed our car all the way back to the college. And there's a open walkway between two buildings where he was pulling into park, and there was a white student, that male student that he knew, walking on that, and he called out to him, and then that man pulled away and left. I don't know what happened to my roommate. Finally she got home, but that was the first time I had ever experienced racism, and it was scary. And it was the first time it's really probably the biggest experience I've ever had of racism. And, just even sitting here so many years later, I can feel my heart gets fast. It beats fast just thinking about it. Um, and that's what people of color experience a lot. And they have to worry about experiencing a lot. And so, I'm trying to do what I can from my position as a white female who's been middle class all her life, never had any financial difficulties, you know, all of that. Um, my life hasn't been perfect, but it's been really good. And I'm very thankful for how blessed that I am with it. But I know that a lot of that is because of my white privilege in America.
That is really scary what you shared, just that feeling of being hunted, of being persecuted. And you're right, just that it is an experience that so many people of color, especially Black and Brown people, have. And I sense you're saying at a deep level that was formative in the sense that it really gave you like a visceral experience of that fear, and then, of course, engendered empathy. So thank you for just sharing and being vulnerable about that and being able to talk about it. I'm trying to find my way on this show too, where we're talking about all these topics, so nothing's being ignored, and yet things are just still in flow and part of the totality. So that's kind of my intention. I wonder, Frances, if you could tell us about some of the quilts you have made for the Social Justice Sewing Academy and a little bit about what this organization
Okay.
is.
They are an organization that uses quilting, and they're empowering people. They're also educating people. They're empowering young people of color. That's what I mean when I'm saying empowering people. So there's a whole program that they use to help young people develop skills so that they can be of service to changing the world as well. Okay. They also, and a lot of this is through things with fabric. A lot of it is. Most of it is. Okay. So they have a thing called community quilts. And I love the community quilts because they are truly community. When I tell you about them, you'll realize what I mean. First of all, a person gets together with a class of students, um, middle school through young adult, sometimes people in prison, uh, sometimes classes in whatever level they're at. They talk about social justice things, and the kids have learned about issues, and the kids kind of each one chooses a an issue that they're related to or that they're interested in. They have a piece of fabric and they glue, roughly glue a couple some cutout things, on there about their issue, their social justice issue that they're honing in on. And they may write up some suggestions for the next step, which is it then goes to an embroiderer, a person who does embroidery. And so I have done that where, yes, yes, you're showing me the picture that I sent you of of some of those squares that I have done. Um, one of them is actually on the website. I was looking at recently. The website is, well, not one of those that you have in your picture there, but I'm sorry. I thought I was going to be able to look at my screen and
Oh, you can. Let's see. We can do a screen share.
that's it right there. So if you look in the fourth row, second block over where it says "Be the Change." That is actually
Right.
one of the blocks that I did. And what I got was the words "Be the," and then there's these little people, different colors for their clothing and different colors for their skin of their faces. And on the people's clothing, the children's clothing, it said CHANGE. So that's "Be the Change." Um, I didn't really have any particular directions for that from the artist who made that, the young artist that made that. But what I did was I did a blanket stitch around the letters "Be the," and then they had written in black marker CHANGE on the small people that you see there. And one of them you really couldn't see the letter because it was on a dark fabric. So I changed all their letters to white, and then I added hair, embroidered hair for all of those different kinds of hair, for all of those little people in the word change. And one of them has braids. That was fun.
The
Um,
before and after is really cool to see.
yeah.
So the kids did the first part, Be the Change, and this was what you added. And how old are the children?
Well, they differ in age. It depends on, because they've done this so many times. I mean, when you look at the site, and you do click on the gallery, you see tons and tons of huge quilts. These quilts end up being, you stand up and you hold your hands over your head, and two people hold the quilt, and that's how big it is. It's huge. They're like queen king size quilts. Um, so anyway, that's an example of one that I changed. Another one that you were holding up before, it was a boy, and he wanted it to say "Men have feelings," and all it had was a just sort of the shape of a head and barely any eyes or anything. That's it. That's it. Men have feelings too. So it was pretty plain and kind of washed out. Actually, that looks actually better than I think it was, because, well, you can see in the one way I did it, I emphasized the mouth more so that you can actually see the mouth and the nose. And I added bits of fabric to relate to what the feelings are, the the hot red fabrics and the cool angry or sad fabrics, um, just kind of exploding out of this face's head. um, and then he wanted the words put on there, "Men have feelings too." um, I really, that's one of the first ones I did. So I've told you about step one, where the kids make their blocks. Step two, they get embroidered. Then they get sent back to SJSA. And then there are sew days, that the ones that I know about right now, they're happening in Vacaville at a quilt shop there called um, Cloth Carousel, is the name of the quilt shop there in Vacaville. And if you go to their website and look at their classes and scroll down quite a bit, you will find the sign up for that. And that is where we take all these blocks and put them together. So in that big quilt that you showed from the website, there were all these different colors in the border of each one of those blocks, because I only worked with the white muslin block. And then it gets to the next stage where it's put together, and we make the borders and the what we call sashing in a quilt. um, like on this quilt here, this part is the sashing, this is the block. Okay, that's just quilt terminology. um, so we put them together, we lay them out on the floor, and different people pick up a block and start to make the sashing. um, Sarah Trail, who is the founder of SJSA, is a young, fantastic woman. She's an amazing person. Um, she has the fabrics for us. So all we have to do is bring a threaded machine, and we put it together. And then, so that's the 3 stages. Then it goes to a different person who's a long arm quilter who has a special machine that's long, like could be 6 feet long or something. You have to have space for this machine, and then you put it on it, and you can quilt a bigger area than you can on a regular domestic sewing machine like I have. Then it goes to somebody who puts a binding on it and a label and a hanging sleeve, probably, so that it can be hung and exhibited somewhere. And then these quilts are exhibited, and I think you mentioned that you may have seen those here in Sacramento.
I saw an exhibit at the California Museum of Women in History, and it featured quilts that were socially progressive, and they think they were done by some Black artists that were drawing attention to Jim Crow and slavery laws. But it sounded like it was, kind of a similar showcasing of quilts, as art being hung in a museum to highlight a cause and bring awareness.
So so that's one thing that Social Justice Sewing Academy does, is the community quilts. Another thing that they do is the remembrance quilts, and they are, you get, as a volunteer like myself. I've made 3 of them. You're given a name, and they're all victims of violent death, usually gun violence. Um, and so you have to do the research without contacting the family, because we don't want to disturb a grieving family. And some of them you may be doing them way after the date that the person died. And then you're also supposed to have the name on there. Those are the requirements. The block itself that I am working on is something like 22 by 26 or 20 by 24 finish size, something like that. You do it, you send it into Social Justice Sewing Academy, and they take 2, and then at a sew day, like I was telling you about before, you take 2 of those and put them into a banner that, with borders, that you would carry, a person can carry, but again, they have to hold it kind of up above their head. It's a pretty big banner, just 2 victims on a banner. So I think the first one I made was Gina. Do you have a picture of Gina?
Let me show. This is just so cool in terms of being able to use quilts to honor someone's life who died from gun violence, and then also have the family be able to get this comfort as well. Here we are. Here's Frances's first the quilt block, or what do you call this part that
It's
you
the
made,
block.
Frances? This is
It's the
so
block.
cool.
Yeah.
Block.
Okay,
Okay.
so Gina Zhang was murdered in a drive-by on Mother's Day in Stockton. She's of the Hmong community there. She and her one daughter, her only daughter, who was 5, and her husband were killed in a drive-by. They were in their living room, and somebody drove by and shot through their picture window. She was 22. All of the fabrics that I used, excepting for those in her face and hair, are Hmong fabrics that I was able to obtain. I made 3 hearts because there were 3 of them. Her necklace is some of the really fine cross stitching that they do, and the bottom lines in this pink. You can see the cross stitching that they do. Those are like where your little arrow is pointing to that black one. That's multiple little tiny X cross stitches to make that shape.
Wow.
And over on the side there, you see some of the other odd things that I've made. Actually, the one on the bottom is where the apples have gone.
That was absolutely just so beautiful, Frances, and the way that you were also able to incorporate fabrics from Hmong culture, since that would be
Yeah.
meaningful to her and her family. That is so lovely. And her family, did the families get the quilts?
No, they don't get the quilt. That's a different program that
They don't.
SJSA does, which
Okay.
I have not participated in personally. But that's where you get, and those are, what are those called? Wait a minute. It says in the book, which I'm going to tell you about. Family quilts, I guess they're called. They're constructed from clothing or photographs and filled with memories to honor victims. And uh, here's one here that has been made from clothing of the family. Um,
Mm.
let's see. Here's a page that has several of them, I guess.
Oh, that
Where
is
you
so
can see the
cool.
families actually appreciating it when it was presented to them and that kind of thing.
That is so beautiful. It would be such a wonderful transitional object for the family to have, of an actual physical object in the form of a quilt to have to hold as they lost their loved one.
Right, right. Do you have the a picture of the one that I made, the memory or the memorial quilt block of Sandra Matak Fry? Okay.
Absolutely. I'm going to screen share that right now. And everybody who's just listening in the audio form, I will put a link to Frances's website so that you can also be able to look at the incredible quilt she made. And before I screen share, Frances, what is that you're holding up?
So with each of these that I have made a little artist trading card, just one for myself, and I have them up on the wall. I grabbed them during our little break. This one is the one for Sandra Matak, and this is the one for um,
Mm.
Gina, and then this is the one for Tomas. And
Tomas.
I will share about.
Yes. Okay, here we go. All right.
Okay, good. So Sandra again was a young woman who lived on the tundra in Alaska, and she was found dead on the tundra in January. And I don't remember what year she died. And violence to natives is high. Um, Matak is that's her, like her nickname, Matak. So I really wanted to include that. I used the pink for that to symbolize the pinks in her face, and you can see what a joyous person. I was able to find a photograph of her. In this case, I used a photograph printed on fabric. And in my research, I actually was able to find out a lot about her, and there was some Facebook posts or things that I was able to find, which was very nice. But I also, in my research, and I was able to research the town that she lived in, which I cannot say either. Uh, but I learned about living on the tundra and what the tundra is really like. And the tundra is like squishy. And so to get from one place to another, you have to walk on boardwalks. So the frame around her is a board fabric. It's fabric that's printed to look like a board. And I actually used the reverse side of the wrong side of the fabric because it was more grayed out like I had seen in the pictures. So the colors that I saw in all the pictures were kind of like these colors that I have used around. These that I used in my little remembrance thing, the letters, her name, Sandra Fry, are in this sort of gray fabric that you see that I have used here in my little card for my own memory. Um, and those are going back to reusing things that people throw away. That gray is from color catchers that I save. So anyway, that's a little throwback to what we were talking about. So that's her story. And then I'd like to talk to you about Tomas or Jose Tomas Mejia. Mejia.
This quilt is so lovely, Frances, and I am just so struck by how much deep thought goes into the fabrics you use, the color, like the pink being similar to the rosy cheeks and her dimples and the
Mhm.
frame with the connection to the tundra. It's just so
Thank
lovely.
you. Yeah, a lot of research goes
Let
into it, and
me
I really try to put all that symbolism into it.
And so with the quilt of Sandra, where is this quilt's ultimate resting spot? Is it part
It's
of
part of the
a
it's part of the
gallery or
collection that Social Justice Sewing Academy has, and they exhibit them at various different places all the time.
Hmm. So you're an artist that could be in exhibition kind of it sounds like whenever they have shows
Yeah, and you won't know it's
kind
me.
of coming and
And you
going.
won't know it's me. There's no recognition of the actual artist in these things, which is fine. That's the way charity or or social work should be. It doesn't matter who you are that's doing it, but the important thing is that you're doing it.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. All right, now let's see the other one that you made. Let me share that one. These are just so
This is
amazing.
nice of you
There
to
we
show
go.
these because it's like I never get to see them, and I don't look at my website that much, as anybody who goes there can tell.
Well, it really brings exactly what you're doing alive, especially because this
Mhm,
is so
mhm.
visual. And just as I saw the exhibit in the California Museum of Women in History, I never knew that there were social justice quilts or quilts like this. So just to actually see them in the flesh, it brings it alive. So everyone, if you're listening to this and you have access to a smartphone, just go to Frances's website, which I'll put the link to, and you can see this quilt that she's going to tell us about right now. Okay, so tell us what we're seeing right now, Jose Thomas Mejia.
Okay, so he was known as Tomas and Mexican descent. This justice for janitors, justi, justicia,
Justicia.
tells a lot about him. I I love Tomas. You know, each one of these people, as I research them, they become my friend, and I'm sad, that their life has been cut short. He worked hard to get here, worked hard to get his family to come here. He had just gotten a house, and his family was doing really well. He was working as a janitor in Los Angeles, a large high rise, I think maybe more than one building complex of expensive apartments. Okay. But was really well liked by the people who lived there. And he would, there was a story I read where someone had lost their loved one, and he went and brought something to her and just sort of sat down with her and was with her for a while. That kind of, just a super loving person. His face is so happy. And he was in the union for not just janitors, but other.
It says here on your website, Service Employees International United, United States Workers
That's
West.
it. Yes. Yes, yes. And I had actually had experience with a rendition of that same union when I was in Washington. So, or not Washington, I mean New York. And he was involved in the chapter that's in Los Angeles. He was specifically involved in domestic workers like himself, and getting them justice and better pay and safer working conditions. And he was killed. And he was killed on the job. And he was, so that's why I have advocate and kind in the stories that I've told you about how he was so nice to this one person that lived in the apartments. He was an advocate and he was a hero. He was stabbed to death because he intervened between a man wanted to get into an apartment of a person that he was dating, but she was I think she was a minor, and he knew that he wasn't supposed to be there, and he knew that he was being aggressive, and he was preventing him from getting in there, and he was stabbed to death.
Wow. He really put his life
Yeah,
on the line and was not just an innocent
right.
bystander. He lived his values all the way up until the very
Yeah,
end.
and this whole, I guess somehow or another he calls out to me because of his the Justice for Janitors movement that he was part of, and really pretty instrumental in it and everything, and um yeah, it's just, and he had worked so hard to bring his family here. Speaking of colors, the blue and the purple are the colors of that union, and all the union signs that I saw were in those colors. Probably the yellow was in it too. Those letters I had cut out by a friend of mine on a cutting machine. Um, Her name was Marian Emerson. As opposed to the letters that I made on the other two, which I cut out myself.
This quilt is so lovely and beautiful, and the vibrancy of the blue, it just radiates this energy from him and from you, and I can feel the joy from this quilt. Like it's very tragic the way he died, and yet the joyfulness and his nature really comes across.
Yeah, I want to lift up the people as they were alive. You know, you don't want to lift up their death because that's not who they are. Who they are is who they were when they were alive. So, yeah.
Wow, well, your work is just really amazing, Francis. There's so much more I want to talk to you about, and we also have to probably, just in the sake of time, get moving towards listening
Yeah,
to
we're supposed
jazz.
to
I do
listen
just want to
to
ask
jazz.
you, we are, and we're going to get there. I just had two more things that kind of came to my mind that I wanted to just ask you about. Just as a creative person, I wonder if you've ever had the experience of feeling blocked. Like, writers have writer's block, and you'll sit down to maybe work on something and maybe feel like, have you ever had that experience? And if you have, again, what do you do sort of spiritually, psychologically to kind of help yourself through that
Mhm.
period?
Okay, so this kind of relates to what we were talking about before when I said I when I get stuck, I would talk to people. So I'm going to move my laptop here. So on this side, you see finished works that I have done, and oh, the lines in this that one, those lines in the background. That's also one of those cases where my marking uh, stayed on there, and I had to put stitches across it. So that was one of those examples of that. But this piece over here is a work in progress. Um, and you can tell he's a lot bigger than the others. He's like the biggest thing.
The
Yeah,
squirrel.
he's my squirrel, Mr. Noisy. And those background sheer things is just, I'm starting to think about the background. So that's not the way the background will be. But I I have been working on this squirrel since 22, and he has sat not on this design wall, but on the other side of the room on an easel for over a year. And I finally got back to him, and I was really hard to get back into it. You leave something. Sometimes you have to leave something alone for a while to let it percolate. But I was really. I've been stuck on him several times. I was stuck on his tail for a while, and I got some help. Um, and then I was stuck on. I was going to work some more on the top part above the branch recently, and I was stuck, and I talked to some people, and my husband gives me, and I talked about, oh, I'm so frustrated. I don't know how I'm going to do this, and that really helps me get out of my funk. Like the next day, I was like, oh, here I am, changing fabrics around, ripping things off, and putting things on, and you know, this is this meth. All of these that I have up here, excepting for the one that's right behind my head, are fabric collage. And basically, it's a gluing process. I You pin the fabrics on till you like it, and like pin it to a board, and then you come and put just a little bit of glue under it to hold it on, so that you get the pins out of the way. Um, and you put fabric on top, and you put fabric under, and until you're layering and you're blending, and all of that is how you want it. But yeah, that's an experience of being stuck in the work, um, and having to either let it percolate or get some advice, either profession. I have a professional person. Susan Carlson is an excellent teacher in fabric collage, and she has award-winning, huge fabric collage works that she does. Her largest one is like an 8-foot alligator. Um, it's huge. Maybe it's 12 feet. It's like the life size alligator. Um, anyway, she does a lot of instruction, and I've taken and actually started him in a class with her. But that's my photo that I used. You know, it's not hers. So.
Well, I love that again, that just when you do get stuck, you're saying, first of all, just kind of let that stuckness be there. Don't try to fight it, and then take a break when you need to, and then bring in community, like you got some inspiration from your husband, just bringing in more people to kind of help get that going. It's so richly textured, the branch that the squirrel is laying on. It's like I can see, I almost want to reach out and touch it. And I also wanted to say he looks almost like a contemplative squirrel. Francis, like I sense that your contemplative practices have perhaps come out in your subconscious here, because he is a squirrel. He's kind of really like chill. Most of the times we see squirrels and they're like they're moving, they're like running to get food, they're escaping a dog. And this is actually a quiet, still squirrel in a moment of repose.
That's really
So I
interesting that you
wonder.
say that, because he was in my backyard, and I was happened to be in the backyard, and I heard this noise, and it wasn't your normal squirrel noise. It was really loud and noisy, and I went over and found him on the branch, and he just looked at me, and with his little head crooked, to the angle, and that's why because he was so noisy. It's interesting that you're thinking of him as being contemplative. He's contemplating on me looking at him. We're really looking at each other when I was shooting these pictures, because that's so interesting that you say that, because I think of him as Mr. Noisy, because I think of him as what drew me to him, which is why I've used unrealistic colors. It's why I'm thinking about possibly making colored rays extending from him. Um, I've had difficulty trying to get fabric that has the tree leaves and blue sky behind it that fits my vision of what's out there in my backyard. So I'm kind of thinking about doing something else. But so anyway, I'm going to talk to Susan about that, Susan Carlson, that I was mentioning, about the background, actually tonight, on a video that we're doing. But
I love that too. And it sounds like another thing that we could add to your tips for us in general when we get stuck is to have kind of like a professional mentor. When you were going to say the name of Susan, I thought you were going to say she's my therapist. And then you were saying she's like your kind of your quilting instructor that will help you to continue to advance in your craft. So that's a good tip too, that sometimes we really do need the guidance of an expert to help us to get to the next level and really refine our
and yes,
skills.
sometimes you need a therapist, definitely. And that's happened for me. That's happened for my children. I mean, my we definitely would use a therapist when we need a therapist. Yeah.
Therapists are great, and it's great to have someone that knows your craft, especially when we're talking about art. That is a
Right.
specific role.
Right.
So, well, there is so much more I could talk to you about. And let us turn to the jazz so that we can just incorporate that part into this show. Now it's time to listen to some jazz. Due to copyright laws, we cannot play the music on air at this time. I respect copyright laws and the incredible artists who created the jazz we listen to, as without them, we would have no jazz. I will leave links to the songs we listen to so you can pause and listen to the songs along with us. It is my dream to someday grow this podcast to the point where I can eventually host it on a major streaming platform which owns the right to play music, so we can all have the communal experience of listening together. Until then, please bear with me. So today, for the jazz, we are going to be listening to Billie Holiday. And Billie Holiday, this is, of course, one of the most genius vocalists, jazz and blues singers ever to exist. And she's a perfect person to bring into this topic of social justice, because she was really a big proponent of the civil rights movement, especially with the song that she sang and really made famous, Strange Fruit, which is the first song we're going to listen to. And audience, I do just want to let everybody know that we are going to talk about the song Strange Fruit, which does reference lynchings that happened, that occurred to Black people in this country. And so if you find yourself having some strong emotions or you don't want to listen to this part, it's okay. Just go ahead and skip. I normally leave the music and the artist that we will listen to as a surprise for the guest. However, I did ask Frances in advance how she felt about listening to this song so that I could give her the choice of not doing it, since it is an emotionally intense and evocative song. So I will just put that out there that we did have this conversation before today. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the jazz. And before we do, I wanted to just read a couple quotes on social justice to mark the first half of the show with the second half of the show. So here are a couple quotes on social justice. Your vocation can be found where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. And that is from Frederick Boner. Without justice, there can be no love. Bell Hooks. And then finally, if you are free, you need to free someone else. If you have power, then your job is to empower someone else. Toni Morrison. So, with that being said, let us go to our first song, which will be Strange Fruit. Now, this song, I learned about the history of it. This song was composed by a man named, let me get his name right here. He was a Russian Jewish immigrant in New York. And he was an English teacher in the Bronx for several years and was very affected and disturbed by the systemic and institutional racism and all the violence that was happening towards Black people. And so he composed this song and he called it Bitter Fruit. And his wife actually began to perform it around New York City in the 30s. And Billie Holiday heard the song one time and then subsequently wanted to perform it herself. And the name was changed to Strange Fruit. So she really wanted to record this song in 1939. However, her record label at the time was very wary of that because of the political fallout and disgruntled consumers, the reaction that people might have to her recording Strange Fruit. So they actually gave her a release, a one-song release from her record contract so she could record the song. And she began to she recorded the song and then she would include it at the end of her set when she would sing every night. And this is a quote. This is from the PBS website, The Story Behind Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. Each night, Holiday would perform the song only once without an encore, after which the lights would go out. Not everyone was impressed. Some of the cafe's patrons promptly stood up and walked out as she began to sing, but the power and audacity of the performance wowed others in the crowd. And so, even though there was a lot of resistance to this song, it actually became one of her her best selling record, and it sold over 1 million copies. And I read also that Billie Holiday is really thought to be a huge influence on the civil rights movement because she started singing this song in 1939. And she was also really persecuted and hounded by the US government for, her involvement in singing this song. So it's a very powerful song, and we are going to hear it. We're actually going to hear a live version. We're going to watch on YouTube. An audience, I will put a link to this song as well. And we're going to see a live version that she sang in 1959, so 20 years after she first made the recording. And I wanted us to listen to this live version because we really get to see her and feel her as much as possible versus if we just listen to an earlier version of that. So I'm going to screen share right now. And if you're listening along with us, you can go and listen to this song on YouTube with us and then come back with us to talk about your thoughts and feelings and reactions. Wow. Well, Francis, just hearing that song, and you might have the categories of emotional listening that I sent you just as a category stimulant to help you think about it. What comes up just hearing this song?
I'm sorry, I lost the categories, but I'll
Oh,
tell you what comes up. And
I can screen share them
okay,
too.
but I like took a couple of little notes as I was listening. That's what I do. Um, and I have not heard this song before. Um, first thing I noticed before she even started singing was the solemnity in her face, as well as during. I got physical chills during the song. I thought the phrase gallant South was really juxtapositional. Like, ooh, I don't want to hear about the gallant South in this song. And then just the descriptive words, the smell of the rotting flesh. I think of the visual of things a lot, you know, um, but, the smell is not something we experience even in movies, Um, the phrase crows to pluck, I wrote down, in Strange and Bitter Crop. Um, it's definitely very, very graphic. Um, and like I said, it uses more than just the sense of sight. Um, I think she even mentions the wind and the rain. You Um, Last year, my husband and I went to the museum that depicts the hangings. Yeah, the lynchings. And each county that has had lynchings in it is a hanging slab monolithic slab with names on it. And some have lots and lots and lots of names, and some have a few. Most have lots and lots of names. And that was a really moving, eye opening kind of experience. Um, this song, what it kind of brought to my mind is a vision of all of those names as something, as people that I could see actually hanging from the trees, real, vividly, not not just a name on stone, you know. Um, and and the lynching museum, which is a nickname, and that's not the proper name for the museum, but um, it's huge. This exhibit is huge. You spend a long time walking through it. It's kind of outdoorsy, outdoors. It's not an indoor exhibit. And you kind of go up ramps and down ramps, and it's very, very huge. But to think of each one of those counties and all the people, and then visualize all those people who were brutally tortured and murdered. It's almost more than one can comprehend. Um, Looking at your categories here, yeah, dwelling, like, um, it brings that whole feeling kind of into me and keeps it there, sort of an emotional dwelling within me. It's something new, innovation, emotional innovation. It's something new as a song, that so experiencing it in a new way, experiencing the lynchings and what they mean and what they were like in a new way, definitely creates a vibe, tone setting. Uh, Not soothing. Emotional justice. Well, it certainly makes me want to bring about justice for those. And the other one was transcendence. Okay. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and it could go in some of them, or could go in multiple of them. Well, thank you for that reflection, and it's really striking too to just hear you as a very visual and creative person to describe kind of having that vision of actually visualizing and seeing the names of the victims of the lynchings, that they were actual people. One statistic I found is that between 1882 and 1968, 3,446 African Americans were lynched. By comparison, in that time period, 1,297 whites were lynched. So it's just very sobering. And when I heard this song, and I've heard it before, and there's each time is still kind of a different experience. I also was really watching Billie Holiday's face and her nonverbal communications of just like how anguishing and how much anguish it would invoke to have to sing this song, and then just to sit with, this is the collective of our nation's history. It's painful to hear, and it's like this feelings kind of sometimes of like, I can imagine being in a club or at a concert of hers, hearing it, and there's almost like an uncomfortable feeling that comes up, and like I found myself almost wanting to escape or tune out a little bit, and that's just sort of this defense mechanism of like not wanting to take in the horrors of it. And yet it is important to hear. It is important to hear. And it's also just so like, it's just amazing what she could do in terms of turning this pain and rage and just injustice, like all of these intense feelings, that she could create this art out of it that somehow, even though she's talking about a horrific topic, there's still hope. Almost like, yes, we're going to continue to work and make things better. Almost like the quilts you make too, that they commemorate somebody's life who died in a terrible way. And yet there's brightness in even like the quilt themselves, like the physical energy of it is this exhortation to continue to march on, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. So, strange fruit. All right. Well, let us move to our second song, another live performance of Billie Holiday. And I really wanted us today in taking her in to get a full range of what she was capable of, as full a range as possible as we can in hearing only 3 of her songs. So, the second song we are going to hear was recorded on December 8th, 1957. And this was recorded in New York City at CBS Studio. And Columbia Records brought together Billie Holiday and also some very famous musicians with her, Lester Young, who she was sort of romantically involved with at the time. He's a tenor sax player. Coleman Hawkins, another incredible tenor sax player, and Jerry Mulligan. Are all accompanying her here. And we're going to hear her sing a very bluesy tune called Fine and Mellow. And as we watch this recording, you can see in this video that she is looking very longingly and lovingly at Lester Young, who she was dating at the time. So there's really like a very fully embodied sense that she's singing from a deep place of being in love while Lester Young is there playing along with her. So just watch for that as kind of an added piece. Fine and Mellow from December 8th, 1957. Well, Fine and Mellow, Billie Holiday, accompanied by an absolutely all-star cast as well. So, Frances, what came up for you to hear this exquisite version of Fine and Mellow?
Ah, wow. Um, the intro was real swingy. Makes you want to move right away, you know. And then, and I noticed that actually throughout. Like there was one shot where the one of the saxes was playing and another one was still in the shot, and you could see him kind of moving around. And Billie Holiday's face as she was looking at the soloists, each in their own turn, and just enjoying them, just enjoying their part in the song. It's like their part was just as important as her part. In some ways, almost more so, I think. Um, and that really showed in her face to me. Um, uh, the, I noticed the first soloist, his eyebrows were going up and down as he was playing.
That's Lester Young on the saxophone, and that's the one she was
Yeah.
dating.
Okay.
They were involved. And then and the other saxophonist, Coleman Hawkins, actually had kind of a professional rivalry with Lester Young because they were both like giants in the jazz world and they had different styles. And so they had a little bit of like, they knew they were kind of
Right.
competition. So it is said that Billie Holiday was not as sort of affable towards Coleman Hawkins because that was kind of her man's rival, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe some backstory about some of the
Yeah.
looks and
Right.
things.
Right. Right. But she was smiling a lot of the time. Um,
Hmm.
I also noticed in I think the last sax soloist, the muscles in his face as he was playing. How what a physical thing it is to play. That's a wind instrument, right? Or brass, whatever. And I love sax, by the way. So it was really nice to hear all the different saxes next to each other, like one bam, 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 so that you could hear the different sax voices. Um,
And the white musician, that was Jerry Mulligan, he was on, the baritone sax, which is, like, the
yeah.
lowest of the low, and then Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins, of course. We all know they played the tenor sax.
I wasn't crazy about the words to this song, to tell you the truth. Um, and you treat me so bad, and I'll stay out all night with you. You make me do all these bad things, which rather interpret as being in love makes you a little crazy, do crazy things maybe. Um, and then, if you treat me nice, I'll stay home. Whoa, talk about social expectations of women, right? And here she is singing it and glorifying it or whatever you want to say. Um, but that was the expectations of this was in 57. Yeah. Um, you know, those are some of the reactions that I had. Um, oh, the other reaction I had is like her appreciation of the other artists as they were playing, but music in a group like that is a collaborative effort, and kind of like we were talking about with Social Justice Sewing Academy and what a collaborative effort it is to make all of these different kinds of quilts that they make. Um, juxtaposed to like what most artists do, which is very individual. Visual artists pretty much work individually. We're we're by ourselves unless we make an effort to be together, like in a quilt guild or something like that. Um, I have a couple of small art quilt groups that I'm a member of, but that's an effort to be together. And mostly we just talk about art. We don't actually do it at that time, but yeah. So I see you're putting these emotional. The music was soothing. It was emotionally soothing. Well, there was some reverie, like dreaming and reflecting, thinking about my own love of my life. Those would be the ones that I would come up for. Those categories would come up for me.
Thank you just for sharing, and also then drawing that parallel for us between the collaborative effort of musicians and artists creating together, and then also that that's what quilters do, and that you could notice yourself having feelings about the lyrics, which were, somewhat sexist and dated, and that the song also did encompass a deep feeling of what it is like to be in love. I think for me, when I heard this song and when I still hear it, she just can articulate in this ineffable way, like just through the tonality and the deep emotion that comes through of this feeling of what it really feels like to be deeply in love with somebody. I think for me, I thought of my children and kind of this really intense love that you have for your children, that it's almost like, this song, Fine and Mellow, it's kind of about, to me, at the deepest level, like you're sort of done for. Like you're so in love with whoever it is, like you're just done for. And I feel that with my children, like no matter what they do, like I'm toast, I'm done for. I just love them so much. And this is really kind of like this deep, unconditional love that ultimately I want to strive for spiritually to have for everybody, even people that I get very shenpawed by and really act, really intensely have a reaction to. Just that, yeah, like that's my goal anyway. I mean, I have a long way to go, but just this feeling of having a totally open heart, no matter what. Like that's kind of the deep message that I get when I hear this song. I would put it in the category of emotional reverie and then emotional galvanization, because it reminds me to be more expressive of that love that I have and share it more just with everybody. And Billie Holiday, I think she was one of the reasons why she's such an incredible artist is because she did go through a lot of personal suffering herself. She could go to the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows like really nobody else could. And that's why she resonates so deeply with audiences, I think.
I really like what you say about the love for your children, and no matter what they do, you're always going to love them. You may not like what they're doing right now, but you love them. It's an unconditional love, right?
Yes, and it feels different when it comes to our romantic partners for sure, as everyone can attest to. It's a different type of love that can feel more conditional, although the goal there is my goal is to have unconditional love for my partner and for everyone. However, it does take continued
It
work.
does. It's to be
One thing
married.
that
Gotta say.
well, I appreciate you saying that. We'll have to get you back, Frances, for another show on how to have a healthy marriage for a number of years. Maybe
Yeah,
we'll do
we've
that
been
next
married for
season.
46 years. It's been a while.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah, we could all learn from Frances, I'm sure, audience around this. One thing I learned about just the life of Billie Holiday is, over the course of many years, is she definitely has had a lot of traumas in her life, including being born to a teen mother when she was, I think her mother was just only 16, and Billie Holiday herself was raped when she was about 10 years old. So I can only sort of speculate as to how these really intense experiences would have come to impact her. However, one thought I had, and I also just recently watched this documentary, the Linda Cool documentary, everybody, that you can watch on YouTube. Just Google Billie Linda Cool. It's Keuhl. And it's a really fascinating look at her life. There's a lot of emphasis on the tumultuous love relationships that she had. And at one point, Linda Cool is asking the people she's interviewing, like, did Billie like to have relationships where there was violence, and like, did she seek it out almost? And at one point, Linda Cool just says to the interviewee, did she like it? And I found myself having a big reaction to that because I could really understand how, because of the major trauma that Billie Holiday experienced early on, emotional abandonment, rape, like being incarcerated, just being a woman of color and having to endure what she did, I could imagine that she sought out relationships that were problematic because she was trying to work something through. There's a concept that Freud has called a repetition compulsion. And basically, the idea is that we continue to repeat patterns, albeit dysfunctional ones, with the hope that we might master them, even though that's not how it really works. And as I'm saying this, you might reflect and just think about like how this appears in your own life, because it really comes up for all of us. So I was just thinking about this concept of like Billie Holiday seeking out romantic partners that often did not treat her well. That was sort of something she was exposed to early on. And I could understand how, in addition to the trauma and like the hypersexuality, it was a way for her to try to manage the really intense feelings she had. And so that was one thing I was disappointed about a little bit in the documentary, that they didn't connect, in my opinion, enough to like the early traumas that she had and how that impacted her later life. So just some of the thoughts I had about that. All right, well, let's go to our final Billie Holiday song. We're going to travel back in time a little bit to 1950. And the song we are going to hear is Billie Holiday singing with the Count Basie Orchestra from Hollywood, California. And this was actually a clip from a movie that Billie Holiday and the Count Basie Orchestra were featured in. And the Billie Holiday documentary, it's called Billie by Linda Cool, has parts of her singing in this song that we're going to sing in color. We're just going to see the black and white version since this was what was available on YouTube. This is a time period when she had been arrested for possession of heroin in 1947. She was released in 1948. And when she was released, The federal narcotics agent stripped her of her cabaret license, so she was not able to perform in nightclubs any longer. So she was then really only to perform or able to perform in, of course, like a recording studio. And she did some concerts at Carnegie Hall to incredible critical acclaim, as one can imagine. However, this is just a little bit of the background as to where she was coming out to sing this song. So let us go to see. I'm going to screen share here Billie Holiday with Count Basie Orchestra in 1950. And the song is called, let's see,
Do you know what movie it is?
Now or Never. I will get that up. Well, Now or Never. The colorized version shows her in her full, gorgeous navy blue satin gown, and we get a sense of this very sexy, very sensual. What did you think, Frances, of Now or Never? What thoughts, feelings, emotions came up for you, reflections as you heard this song?
Well, definitely more upbeat from the very beginning. That's fun. It's going to be a fun song, you know. Well, I don't think it's in the part that we were we really heard, but Count Basie's introduced her as a song stylist, song stylist, and I thought that was really good. She mentioned in the first, well, either, I don't know. She mentioned before she started singing one of the other ones. She mentioned how she never sings anything the same, and that's so jazz. I mean, that's what jazz is. You just don't do it the same every time. Um, and that comment that she made about not being the same made me think about how I don't like to make the same thing ever again. You know, I want it to be everything to be different. You know, and I don't. You look at what I make and it's different styles and all that kind of stuff. But back to this song, I like the upbeatness of it. I liked the she came across as being a whole lot stronger in her. She was like in a position. Her voice, her what she was saying was in a position of coming from a position of power. You know, you say yes or no. This is my ultimatum to you. Yes or no. You know, stay or go. This is I'm setting the rules here. You know, so I liked that. You know, she just seemed so much stronger to me than the previous song that we listened to, where she was, you know, into this a relationship where he wasn't nice, and yet if he was, she would just stay home and cook the meals and raise the kids. You know, just I'm I'll be the good housewife. You know, um, not that there's anything wrong with being a good housewife. I've done that for many a year, and then that's okay with me. You know, but anyway, yeah, those are some of my reactions to it.
I love those reflections. And I love also that you mentioned her it was kind of like a defiance was the word that came to mind just when you talked about her just really being in control. Like she's kind of cheeky and playful, but she definitely has a little defiance there as she's sort of saying now or never. What categories or category of emotional listening would you put this song into?
Elevation to feel better makes me feel better because it's so upbeat and happy, and just the whole tempo of it. Yeah, reverie to remember and reflect, and it's kind of like a something to aspire to, of being in control, you know, that kind of thing. It could be galvanizing, I think, for a lot of people, um, especially if they're coming from a place where they're not in control, and then they would think that yeah, okay, I can do this too. I can set ultimatums in my relationships. Um, okay, that would be it.
I think for me, this song, I love it because it's so full of energy and ebullience and joy, and I think she really speaks to the universal experience of being ambivalent about things that we can all be ambivalent about, be it a romantic relationship or perhaps a job or just anything, you know, this feeling of like, what am I going to do? She really captures that spirit. And you're right, in this version, the way she's singing it, it's like she's giving this ultimatum to someone, and you kind of get the sense that she's not going to be like that brokenhearted if they don't choose her, you know, if they're now or never. If they're never, that she's just like, well, okay, you know, that's your loss, but like I'm over here in the
Yeah.
now. And so I love that like she can just stand in kind of like just the truth of who she is and what she wants, and maybe this is a side of her that is really knowing her worth and what an incredible person and artist she is, you know, that she can tap into that and really fully convey like she's the one to be desired, which really comes across in this song.
I wanted to ask you, did she write these lyrics?
For
Yeah.
now or never, I don't believe so. Let me look up who composed this song because this is a classic jazz ballad that other artists have covered. Who wrote
I mean,
Now or Never?
was she a writer, composer, or she sang other people's music, you know? I mean, but the reason I was asking that is that I was thinking about what you said before we started listening to it about how she had just come out of prison. Yeah, she's lonely. She sings about being lonely. I've been away from you for so long. Now is the time, baby. You know?
She did. Okay, so I just looked this up. She
Okay.
did. And she wrote several jazz songs. So I guess this is one of it. Wikipedia says it's a song written by her and composer Curtis Reginald.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because those lyrics really kind of fit with where you were telling me she was in her life at that time.
Mm, say more about that.
Well, like you said, she just came out of prison, so she had been alone for, I don't know, a couple years maybe. It sounded like what from what you were saying.
It's like about a
Yeah, a
year
year
she was
maybe.
in prison.
But that's a long time, you know. And you know, I picture, okay, what does this beautiful, sexy lady look like with this beautiful voice when she's in prison? You know, how does that change her while she's there, and how does that change her after she leaves? You know, she's it's got to make a person take stock one way or the other of their lives and their goals in their life. You know, it could be one way or the other. It could go one way or the other. You know, but it's got to make a person kind of stop and think at least a little bit, not a lot. And it looked like she was thinking a lot about it.
That's a good point. And also, too, just because she did continue to perform Strange Fruit throughout the entirety of her career, she was, you know, followed often and, you know, kind of persecuted by the US government who were always trying to get her to stop performing the song. And then, you know, were trying to sort of bust her on possession of narcotics, which is kind of really like a nominal, you know, charge. So she definitely, I imagine, experienced that feeling of being like, yeah, kind of hunted or like she's sort of like always having to look over her shoulder for like what is coming at me. And so I can imagine there were moments where she could be in total control, like in this song, and that especially that it felt really good to be in that position when she was able and she could really convey that musically. Well, I'm so glad that we could just get a little introduction to Billie Holiday and just everything that she was. Basically, if you want to hear a female embodiment of the divine sing, you just put Billie Holiday on, and there is God singing for you.
You know, I will definitely look into
So,
Billie Holiday music. Thank you very much, Jesse.
yes, no, she's amazing. Every time I hear her, too, especially, and I really recommend you guys watch this latest documentary that came out about her, Billie, by Linda Cool. It just, there's so much, I think, nuance and historical context that one can glean. I think it just gave me an even deeper appreciation for her music. Before we sign off for today, Frances, I ask everyone who's a guest on the podcast to do what's called a dedication of merit. And this is a Buddhist ideal, I believe. And the idea is that for all of the work that you did today, just being open hearted and sharing your actual art with us and being vulnerable, that you can dedicate that work to a loved one, or it could be a cause in the world that really pulls at your heart, a current political event, and then I'll do the same, just as a way to really honor you for your time here today.
I have a hard time choosing sometimes on anything. um, I would like to dedicate this to my husband because I love him and he's so supportive of everything that I do and has taught me so much. I would like to dedicate this to my father, who taught me a love of art, music too. And I would like to dedicate this to the oppressed, people who are living with violence, the oppressed.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. I think for me today, for some reason, I'm really thinking just about children all over the world, and especially children. I know the last couple times I did this, I did the conflict in Gaza and in Israel. The children, especially involved in this conflict, children who were hostages and were released, children who are potentially still hostages, children who are in Gaza and are hungry and starving and on the brink of famine, children in other regions of the world who are dealing with just all kinds of trauma and wars. That's what's really on my heart, that maybe, and you guys, and when I'm doing this, I'm not trying to make it like I'm some like good, sanctimonious, holy person. I am not. I F up like all the time. I'm constantly working on myself. It just, for some reason today, I'm really thinking about the plight of children all over the world. So may all children be free of suffering and be peaceful, happy, and content. Well, Frances, it was just truly an honor and a delight to have you here today. And we had so much to talk about. And I really want to thank you for your time and for just illuminating us and everyone. I will leave links to Frances's website and the Social Justice Sewing Academy as well.
And I will send you the name of the book that I referred to also, Stitching Stolen Lives, which you can also find on the website.
Awesome. Stitching Stolen Lives. Okay. Well, on that note, we will say goodbye and tune in with us next week, everybody, for another segment of Jazz Therapy. Thank you for listening, reflecting, and being present with us today. Please leave us a review and comment, as we love feedback and aim to continuously improve and innovate, embodying the spirit of jazz itself. Jazz Therapy is edited and produced by Patricio Garcia. Sage Salmon is our social media coordinator. To connect with us, find us on Instagram and TikTok. Our email is info@jazztherapy.com. Check back next week for our next episode. May Jazz Therapy soothe your soul.